Good evening, book lovers. Welcome to another episode of Cath-Lit Live. I am your host, Amy Cattapan. Well, tonight I have a friend from Wisconsin, from my state to the north, joining me. I was recently on his podcast. Hey, it's Father Edward. So my guest tonight, as you might guess, is Father Edward Looney, and he just released his latest book. So we're going to be chatting with him. As always, if you haven't checked out the Hallow app yet, please check that out, hallow.app/Cath-Lit Live. And they've got an Easter challenge going on right now, but they always have wonderful things. In fact, I just saw a Marian consecration coming up, which by the time you might see this on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube instead of on my Facebook page, or if you're watching this on Instagram later, you might want to hop right on because they will have already started the Marian consecration by then. So let me talk a bit more about my guest tonight, and then I'm going to bring him on. Father Edward Looney was ordained a priest in 2015 for the Diocese of Green Bay. In addition to a Bachelor of Philosophy, a baccalaureate in Sacred Theology, and a Master of Divinity, he holds a licentiate in Sacred Theology. I hope I said that right. I practiced with Father Edward first. He told me it's more than a master's degree, less than a doctorate, from the University of St. Mary of the Lake Mundelein Seminary, which is not too far from here outside of Chicago. Father Looney specializes in Marian theology, having authored numerous works on Mary, including A Lenten Journey with Mother Mary and How They Love Mary, 28 life-changing stories of devotion to Our Lady, available from Sophia Institute Press. He is a past president of the Mariological, we'll get that word out, Mariological Society of America, and continues to research, reflect, and write about Mary. Father Looney is a popular media personality, podcast host, as aforementioned, and contributor to online publications and print publications like Living Faith. His interests include the Blessed Virgin Mary, sainthood causes, shrines, and film television. Help me welcome to the show, Father Edward Looney.
Sorry about that. I had to click OK.
How are you, Father Edward?
Well, great. Thanks so much for having me. And, been a longtime follower of yours. And, we've been partners in crime, in a sense, in a lot of different Catholic areas. So it's
Yes.
great to join you again.
We have a few events we've done together. In fact, I want to mention before I forget, this podcast, of course, it's on my Facebook, but it'll be up on my YouTube, and it'll also be on Catholic Mom before our Catholic Writers Guild conference, which is coming up at the end of May. And you are our keynote speaker on the first day.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I've been a longtime member of the Guild, I guess. And, I heard that my name was being circulated around or whatever. And in fact, I found some emails from you from when I searched your name in my email account the other day. And it's like from 2022. And you were like asking if I wanted to be a part of a panel. And I regret that I never replied. So, but
I think you were busy the last couple of years. So we finally got you this year.
Yeah, happy to be there. So.
And what are you going to be talking about this year?
Yeah, I was asked to speak on consecrating our writing to Our Lady. So, of course, Mary has been one of my specialties for a number of years. So, yeah, I guess, that was kind of something people want to know. And it's actually a topic I've not spoken about, but I'm happy to develop something and have I already know the format of the talk. It's three different movements, so it'll be nice, I think. So I'm going to do a little reading for that here in the month of May.
Awesome. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about your newest release, Places of Grace. So give us there it is. Give us the little elevator pitch. What is this book about? Is this another Mary book, or are you veering off into new territory this time?
Yeah, that's great. So, I think maybe the last time I was on Cath-Lit Live, we talked about meditations after Holy Communion. I could be wrong,
I think
but
that's right.
so that was kind of my foray out of writing Mary books. I've written other Mary books since meditations after Holy Communion, like How They Love Mary. But yeah, Places of Grace has a little Mary in it because basically it's a travel memoir or a travel log, as some might call it. And essentially, I divide it into a few different sections. So there's Marian apparition sites, Marian shrines, saint shrines and churches. and then monasteries and graves. So I do treat Mary a little bit, just reflecting about different visits to Mary and apparition sites. So there's still a little Mary, but yeah, it's kind of cementing kind of my role in travel and commenting on shrines and things like that. And yeah, the book, it was born out of this retreat that I gave. I was asked to give 5 talks for a group, and I had 4 talks, and the fifth one I had nothing. And I'm like, what could I easily talk about? And I thought, well, I'll put together a PowerPoint, put some pictures together, and just share about holy places I visited and kind of the impact they made on me as a person. So that's what Places of Grace is. It's kind of looking at holy shrines and churches and saints, and basically how they inspired me, and how, like, when you visit one of those places, you receive a grace from God.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've talked about it as like a travel memoir, but it's really sort of more of a pilgrimage. So can you talk a bit about like what's regular travel versus pilgrimage? I've been on pilgrimages many times before. Well, what is the difference between the two, and what's the value of a religious pilgrimage?
Yeah, so I think you can make any travel holy, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
any person who's going on a trip this summer, no matter where you're going, and Alatea has a wonderful series that they've been doing. This one, I think it's probably the same columnist or contributor, but basically they're highlighting 5 spots in each state in the United States. And so no matter where you're going, there's a good chance there's a shrine or a holy place, and you can visit that place. So even, I went to Nashville to enjoy music and the culture down there, but I looked up Catholic sites and I went to 2. So it was kind of making holy kind of a sacred trip, but still incorporating God. And isn't that the case if someone goes to Orlando? Take your family to Walt Disney World, Universal, and but you can go to the Shrine of Our Lady or Mary, Queen of the Universe, down in Orlando. You can have a spiritual experience in the midst of the secular that you're doing. So, but a religious pilgrimage, really kind of anciently, there were these different walking pilgrimages, the most famous being the El Camino de Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
But also in England, I've been to Walsingham. That was an ancient pilgrimage trail. In fact, Walsingham, which I do feature in Places of Grace, but Walsingham, an apparition of Our Lady, who asked for the home of Nazareth to be replicated, because you couldn't go to the Holy Land at that time because of the invasions and stuff. This was in the 1100s, 1200s, 1000s, one of those centuries, but you couldn't
Long
go to
time
the
ago.
Holy Land. Yes. And so Our Lady basically brought Nazareth to the people of England. Or Canterbury. When I was in Canterbury just last year, people were making the walking pilgrimage. They, got their book stamped. And so these walking pilgrimages have been super popular in Catholicism throughout the centuries. But so the ultimate place of pilgrimage, of course, is the kingdom of heaven, but also on earth, it's to the Holy Land, visiting these holy places of Jesus and Mary. Other places have popped up, apparition sites, shrines, devotional areas. But so a pilgrimage is really a place where you go when you're maybe searching for something, when you have an intention that is weighing very heavily on you. The idea of a pilgrimage is you make a sacrifice. You're sacrificing your time. You're sacrificing your money by going there. Like, it's going to cost you something. There'll be an expense, but yet you're going to encounter God there, and God is going to hear your prayers in that specific place. And there are lots of different places in Catholicism where you could visit, and some of the places have a particular grace, like they're known for something. Like if you go to Our Lady of La Leche in Florida, that is a shrine known to be a place of devotion for couples struggling with fertility. So if you're infertile, you might go there and you might have the grace of conception or the gift of adoption in your life. That's one of the graces that people receive. So sometimes there's like a singular grace associated with a place, but also then there's kind of just the very fact that I'm there, that God is pouring out his gifts to us.
Okay, speaking of gifts, let's talk about grace because you say these are places of grace. So, what does that mean? Because I feel like that's a word that can get thrown around, right? Like, okay, I say grace before meals. I'm
Yeah.
asking for God's grace. What does that mean, and how does that fit with these places that you're talking about?
Yeah, so essentially, when it comes to grace, a grace is something that's freely given by God. It's unmerited, that this is coming from the goodness of God. And when we talk about grace too, like Mary is called the mediatrix of all grace because through her, came to us the grace of salvation and redemption because of the incarnation. And so some of the saints say that all the graces come to us through Our Lady, that God wishes to dispense grace through Our Lady. Even St. Alphonsus Liguori would say that when you're asking a saint to intercede for you, well, that saint, like you lost your keys, St. Anthony, pray for me. He goes to Our Lady, the Queen of all saints, and she goes to her son, and kind of the trickle back the grace then through the intercession of that saint. So I guess what I mean by grace is just kind of the holy gift that God has in store or what awaits us. And so as I wrote places of grace, like I named a grace for each place. So for example, I grew up in a small town north of Green Bay called Oconto. And in Oconto, back in 1669, a Jesuit priest celebrated Mass on the banks of the Oconto River. Growing up in my childhood, there's a cross there, there's a historical marker recounting the event. And so it was just something I always saw. And being a person of faith, like that always was a place where I just kind of paused, remembered, and continued on. But as I thought about it, I'm like, well, that's the grace of the Mass. Like the fact that Mass was offered there. And then ultimately later, a church would be established in the town. And, a century and a half later, I would be ordained a priest and say Mass in that town. And, so the grace of the Mass and what happened just from that event, but then how the Mass continues to be celebrated. So kind of looking at different places and saying, what is the grace that I see that God gave me through that place? And, sometimes that grace for me is going to be a lot different than what that grace is for you. And it might be different than the singular grace of a place. So, being in Wisconsin, we have the Marian Apparition Site, Our Lady of Champion. So I would say the singular grace of Champion is the grace of conversion and catechesis, and healing. But for me, I wrote about the grace of saying yes, because for me, it was a place pivotal in my discernment of a priestly vocation. And so for me, it was the grace of saying yes. And I can look to Our Lady who said yes. I can look to Adele who said yes to God in so many different ways in her life. So that was a grace for me, looking back on my experience in relationship to that holy place.
Okay, so with each of these places, you're giving us a grace and like maybe a lesson or something you took away from there, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so Our Lady of Champion tied into your decision for your vocation. Can you give us another example? What's another location included in there, and maybe the grace or the lesson that you tied into that location?
Yeah, there's so many that I could articulate. And as I kind of do all these different interviews, I guess I'll talk about each one separately, but I guess as I just open up here, like it's a Holy Hill, another Wisconsin place. So
Yeah,
I don't
I've been
want
there.
people to I don't want people to think I cater specifically to Wisconsin. I don't. It's all over the world.
Sure, Father.
But actually, why don't so the grace of Holy Hill was the grace of stained glass windows. Just their stained glass windows are so powerful in communicating the story of a saint like Saint Therese or the story of our faith. And so, that's one. Another one, I mentioned Walsingham earlier. So that's England. So we'll get away from Wisconsin, but Our Lady of Walsingham in England, like it was a shrine that I was driving to that was just shrouded in mystery. Like I intentionally didn't look anything up about the place because I didn't know anything about Our Lady of Walsingham. And like this has been like a theory of mine, is that people go to shrines and they don't necessarily learn what the shrine is really all about. Like if you go to Champion, you might miss a place. Or someone I know went to Holy Hill, missed the St. Therese Chapel, didn't see the stained glass windows of St. Therese on the second level. So like you miss out. And so I wanted to see how well the story of Walsingham would be communicated to somebody from the United States, someone who didn't know anything about it. And I walked away knowing the story of Walsingham, but it was shrouded in mystery. Like I knew certain factoids, but I didn't really put them all together to understand the true story. So that was the grace of mystery and kind of coming to understanding. But really, talking about the home of Nazareth that I mentioned earlier, that Our Lady requested to be replicated there. Well, isn't that the mystery of our faith, the mystery of the incarnation, that God himself would be born of a virgin, would be conceived by the Holy Spirit? Like this is one of the great mysteries of our faith. So that's kind of the unpacking of the grace of mystery, for example, afforded by an apparition site in England.
Well, all right. Well, I'm sure how many places do you have in there? Do you know about how many places are in there?
45.
Oh my goodness, that's the same number of saints in my Saint Squad book. Did you do that on purpose, Father Edward?
No, there just came a point where you had to be done writing,
Yeah.
And I could have written a lot more, and I guess it leaves room for places of grace, Roman numeral 2,
right. The second volume.
which, as a person that visits a lot of different places, I think to myself, I'm like, okay, well, as I go, I should write my reflection right away. Like I already have a running document. Like I was just at EWTN 2 weeks ago. And apart from the Hansville Shrine, like I was at EWTN, their chapel where you see Mass on TV. And like, as I was there and I was celebrating at Mass and praying in the chapel, like I was just really moved by the presence of angels in the chapel. So like, that's what I would call the grace of EWTN, the grace of the angelic or something like that. And be able just to reflect about all the different angels and coming to know and understand the different choirs of angels and such. So, there's definitely another book, maybe 2, 3, 5 years down the road, I think.
As your travels continue.
Yes.
All right. Well, in the meantime, where can people find out more about you and your books and maybe ask you to come and speak about one of these topics?
Yeah, I guess, I have a website, but I lost the password to update it. So it's really out of date. So don't go to my website. And, but just find me on social media. My handle at FR Edward Looney. On YouTube, I'm just Edward Looney. So you can find me on socials and reach out that way.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Father Edward.
Well, thank you.
All right, we're gonna wave goodbye to him now, and I'm just going to remind all of you that if you've read any of Father Edward's books, go ahead and tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear about which ones you have read. Go check out Places of Grace. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe so that you can catch all of my future episodes. We do about one a month here on Cath-Lit Live. And until next time, I'm just going to wish you all happy reading.